Welcome, everyone. We know that folks are just coming in. We'll give it maybe another 1-2 minutes before we get started. Thank you so much for joining us. Hello, everyone. As you're coming in, if you would like to just quickly drop your name in the chat, who you are, if you have any affiliations, maybe where you are geographically, welcome. Wish we had time to introduce everyone, but at least hopefully that will be a chance to do that. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I know more people are coming in here, but we do realize it's 5 on the East Coast PM time on the, Wednesday afternoon. So we want to go ahead and be respectful of everyone's time. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm so honored to be here with my friends and colleagues who will be introducing themselves in a minute. I am Nsedu Obot Witherspoon, but everyone calls me Nse. I'm the executive director of the Children's Environmental Health Network, and very pleased to be a part of this official release of the Racism That Upends the Cradle, How Black Children Are Differentially Vulnerable to the Impacts of the Syndemic, the Economic Crisis, COVID-19 Pandemic, and Climate Change, that has been released by the Chisholm Legacy Project and the Children's Environmental Health Network. So again, if you're coming in, if you'd like to, just a quick check-in, we welcome everyone. If you could just add your name to the chat, any affiliations you may want to acknowledge, or where you are geographically or internationally. So first, also just want to acknowledge a huge thank you to Jacqui for kind of, helping to see this through in a big way. Your leadership, your sisterhood, your passion for the vulnerable is always to be commended and so appreciated and respected. And same as well to Adrienne and Kristie, who will be introducing themselves in a minute as well. Really appreciate both of you jumping in so many helpful ways. And also, and Adrienne is a contributing author, and our editor, Lori from Island Press, and Iris, who helped with the design layout. Very appreciative to all of you. So we were very specific in thinking through the title of this report, and the metaphor and the imagery of the title is very intentional. Simply put, there are far too many Black children that are literally, figuratively, and systemically denied access to the safety in the cushion cradle that so many take for granted throughout their entire life cycle. And the report does highlight prenatal risk all the way through different life cycles. And that is, of course, if you are, we call it blessed to survive the gauntlet of what is being Black in America. So this was a very emotional journey. It was well over a year of back and forth, and very hard to even pull this together, for sure. I know for both of us. What we did was we collected, I think, a unique analysis. I have not seen an analysis like this, and a collection of resources to support our positions, as well as combining economic impacts upon the Black community, which have been documented over time, but also the intersections of the climate implications on a day-to-day basis to children in general. And our experience at the Children's Environmental Health Network is not covered adequately or even equally compared to other populations, and certainly not those of the most vulnerable in the child health population. And then when you compound that by the impacts of climate and the COVID pandemic together, it seemed to us that this was a very critical narrative to tell. So we were very purposeful about including personal stories that you will see throughout the report to assist in various sections to really exemplify and show this work and these atrocities, I'd say, in action and the impact on real people and in real circumstances. So I'd love to have Jacqui, Adrienne, and Kristie introduce themselves as well. So Jacqui, please.
I think since I'm going to speak, then Adrienne and Kristie should go first, and then I'll go into my 5 minutes. Thank you.
That sounds great. Yes, thank you. Adrienne.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Adrienne Hollis. I'm the CEO of Hollis Environmental Consulting and the Ubuntu Power Project. I work at the intersection of environmental racism, environmental justice, climate change, and public health. So this is a particularly sensitive and timely discussion for me. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Adrienne. And Kristie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristie Trousdale, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Children's Environmental Health Network, working with Nsedu, again, at the intersection of children's health and the environment, and really excited and honored to be a part of this conversation with all of you today.
Thank you so much, Kristie. And Jacqui.
Great. So I'd like to add my welcome to everyone. We are just so thrilled to have you all on the call. It's such an important conversation. When I first reached out to Nsedu in, I think it was around May of 2020, to suggest that we do this together, it was out of heartbreak of seeing what was happening during that time of COVID-19 and seeing how COVID-19 really followed the well-worn paths of the systemic inequities in our society. And I often talk about when COVID-19 first kind of was being talked about in February, but when I was starting to really clue in on it in March of 2020, I wrote this document called the 10 inequities of the COVID-19 pandemic. And it was out of being a climate justice activist. And it was anyone who has done work on climate justice would be able to see that the societal inequities are going to be the ones that are exploited by this type of pandemic. And so when we saw the political actions that were happening, when we saw the economic inequities, when we saw which populations were most impacted and which populations were most vulnerable, it was the same kind of situations that we see with the climate crisis, when we see with the economic crisis that arose from COVID-19 and the underpinnings that really were brought to light with the murder of George Floyd. We talk about I was on a panel with Stephen Benjamin, who was then the mayor of Columbia, South Carolina. And he said that COVID-19 served as an X-ray to expose the broken bones of American society. And it was true in terms of those broken bones, and it's the children whose bones are most brittle that are really facing these challenges in a differential way with so little in the way of protection, as Nsedu said, in terms of that title. We talked about the title and how the title felt a little bit kind of violent when we talk about trying to move violence out of our vocabulary as we speak, but yet we can't move violence out of our vocabulary until we move it out of our lives in some ways. And so it was important for us to really use that imagery, because our children really are being upended from the safety of any type of cradle. And so if folks saw the op-ed where we co-authored that said that we are we are failing as a nation, we are failing Black children, then we know that we're supposed to be the stewards of the well-being of the folks who are the most vulnerable in our society. We're supposed to be the stewards of the well-being of our children. And we've seen from the headlines, we've seen from looking around our communities, we've seen all the different signs that we are failing Black children. And so my name is Jacqui Patterson. I am the executive director of the Chisholm Legacy Project, and based in Baltimore. And again, it's such a pleasure to be here with you all. And I also add my thanks to Nse for really answering the call and going on this journey together on this. And I also thank Adrienne for contributing really as we were trying to get this finished after after almost 2 years of working on it. She helped us to really bring it to the finish line. I think that our own Vicky Angelico and Josie Carut with the Chisholm Legacy Project, who are on the executive team, who have just been awesome from beginning to end in terms of making sure this happens. And definitely thank Iris, who created such a beautiful product for such a sober subject in terms of the layout and design of the paper. I think Natalie and Elizabeth on our team who helped to contribute to the editing. Also, Vicky did the final copy edit for it. And absolutely thank Lori Major from Island Press, who also really helped us in going back and forth. And after we had been working on it for 2 years, our eyes were crossed. We barely knew what was on the paper. And so Lori came at it with fresh eyes and was able to say, this doesn't make sense, or maybe you should do this. And so she really helped it to be final. And then Kyler also who helped us to be able to do promotion on it. So I'll hand it back to Nse. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqui. So again, appreciate all of you. We're going to get into a few highlights here, and then we're going to leave some time to we'd love to hear from you and your initial thoughts. And for those that haven't read the report yet, we hope and encourage that after this webinar, you'll be inclined to do so, if not before. So just a few highlights on the fact that, our report really, again, is starting in the womb, the first environment of a child, and carrying, through childhood at various key development stages, and bringing in, well-documented thresholds of understanding that are hard to digest, but are real and are happening. For example, maternal stress. So my background is maternal and child health. I moved to the DC area in '98. And I graduated from the maternal child health program at the George Washington University from day one in our program, especially being in a city like Washington, DC, which still has some of the highest infant mortality rates in the country, and especially among the most marginalized communities. I was taught from day one that Black women are exhibiting high levels of stress at twice the rate of white women. This was over 2 decades ago, and 5 times more likely to report adverse physical and emotional symptoms. And so when you look at this, it's due to a lifetime of ensuring social economic disadvantages at various levels of one's life. And so that direct connection to infant mortality cannot be separated. We know that Black infants are twice as likely to die compared to white children, and it is not explained by differences in income, by education, or access to healthcare, which is where many of us in public health tend to go, right, when we're trying to differentiate and figure out some of these very traumatic statistics. So you have generations of mental and physical stress playing out generation after generation. And again, those of us trained in maternal and child health understand how vital not only those 9 months of growth are in the womb, exposure, nurturing, support, and or trauma, but certainly those first years of life, first days of life are critical on so many levels of the well-being, the balancing out, if you will, of that child. Economic mobility is also talked about in this report. Black children are born in the top 5th income distribution levels, and yet have only an 18% chance of staying there into their adulthood, compared to white children having a 41.1% chance to attain and sustain higher income levels. And again, I know all of you on this call understand how vital and how real economic proportion and distribution is to all facets of one's life, quite honestly. We get into a bit on segregation and redlining and the historical impact that redlining has had in communities, especially Black communities, historically in the United States. So Black children are all far too often growing up in impoverished and segregated neighborhoods still, with lasting legacies from redlining policies. So former redline communities are associated still with extreme heat, air pollution, food insecurity, flooding, housing insecurity, displacement, school segregation, and on and on. Now, these are serious impacts that are, again, vital and very impactful at all stages of a young developing child and soon to be adolescent's life, and really can have impact for the lifelong journey of that child into adulthood. School tracking. So the notion of using problematic standardized measures to determine a student's intelligence without any input really from the student or family themselves, the ones closest to that student, with a high percentage of placements in non-college tracks among Black children and soon to be adolescents compared to white students and children. And then the school to prison pipeline was something that was really important for us to be clear about. The strong evidence of Black children being targeted throughout school disciplinary policies that then leads to earlier introduction of criminal justice to the criminal justice system. And that's one example there, but another example that I've seen in person is right here in Ivy City, Northeast Washington, DC, where the way that the community is set up on a couple of community tours and some work I've done with Empower DC and many other wonderful, important advocate groups in the area, it's a whole bunch of cement, hardly any green grass at all. The only park is laden with all kinds of things you don't want young children being exposed to, including drug needles and all kinds of other things. So their children, young adolescents, are encouraged to go to the jail within the neighborhood, a couple blocks away from the houses, to play basketball. So that is not very telling right there of where the thought process of some who would make such a suggestion is. I don't know, but that's just a whole nother side of that scenario, which is mind-boggling to me. Okay. Disproportionate impacts of climate change and grief will be my last comments before I move on. So we do know that there is a double jeopardy being played out here for Black children. Climate anxiety is extremely real. I'm the mother of 4. The older 3 children, for sure, daily talk to me about the anxiety they're feeling just in general for being college, high school, middle school students, but also the reality of how challenging it is to think about 5, 10, 15 years from now and what their lives are going to look like. Combining that with stress, depression, PTSD, many children in general are living through very traumatic weather events and very traumatic, climate-induced crisis moments, and are losing loved ones, are watching extremely critical, challenging situations play out. If they're lucky enough to have their lives after these very extreme circumstances, life after is not like they've known. Displacement, their schools, their childcare, not there anymore or not open for months or half a year or more to come. That total change in that life, that style, that scheduling is very big when it comes to the mental health and well-being of young children. And I'll just leave with this, that reporters at the Washington Post, and this is highlighted in our report, state that Black people are 40% more likely than other groups to currently live in places where extreme temperatures driven by climate change will result in higher mortality rates. And in addition, African Americans are 34% more likely to live in areas where childhood asthma diagnoses are likely to be exacerbated by climate change. Those are some of the very real, very heavy statistics that are there, that are right before us, that we combed together, pulled together. We're very careful about our references, peer-reviewed referencing, gray literature included, and showcasing these stories throughout the report that are exemplifying in day-to-day fashion. Many of us understand and can relate to a lot of these stories in many ways, how this generational impact, how these young exposure concerns and compounding of concerns and challenges all together, and now throwing in a worldwide pandemic, are truly impacting today and certainly into the future of Black children in the United States. I'd love to move on to Jacqui now, who's going to talk a little bit more about the systems that have, established these injustice and disparity situations for Black children.
Thank you so much. So, as I said at the beginning, the same systemic inequities that have Black children differentially impacted by COVID-19, differentially impacted by climate change, differentially impacted by the economic crisis, and certainly the ongoing underpinning being racism in the United States and an extractive economy. And so the reason that we go so deep on these very devastating statistics, these very devastating stories, is because we spend, I don't know how many, we have 23 pages in total, and of them, about 20 of them are going into these devastating statistics, because it needs to be clear that we can't just tweak a system that's doing exactly what it was intended to do. And our extractive economy was designed to make sure that there are winners and losers, and it's very clear who are in the loser track by the design of our economy, and it's our Black children who are suffering the most. And so as we go through story after story, statistic after statistics, scenario after scenario, it's really to make it very clear that we lead up to the transition from an extractive economy that's needed to address all of the societal conditions to really ensure that we are in a societal situation where there is truly liberty and justice for all. And we need to debunk the myth of scarcity that says there isn't enough to go around, and therefore we have to have our economy structured in such a way. We have to reclaim the notion of the commons, and that the commons should be common, meaning universally accessible. And so this next section I'll be talking about a little bit is how Black children are underserved by our systems and excluded from the commons, whether it's access to active mobility. I recently went on a transportation tour where I was riding a bike, going from place to place with this group, 20 miles a day, and it was nothing. I loved it. I loved it from beginning to end. I loved the exercise of it. I loved being in the fresh air of it. I loved just the practicality of like using a bike for transportation and getting exercise, enjoyment of nature and so forth. But I also mourned the fact that, I was doing this in Amsterdam, and that you couldn't do this here at home in most places. That one statistic is that fatality rates for Black cyclists are 30% higher than for their white counterparts, or our white counterparts. And so as I kind of enjoyed the joy of feeling the wind in my hair and on my face, I thought, this isn't, at home, this could be a death sentence, just trying to do this, to go from one place to another. And I can't think of any of our communities, the communities that I grew up in Chicago, the community I live in Baltimore, as being, I used to ride my bicycle in Baltimore, but I was taking my life in my hands every time I did it. And we know that it's not necessarily something we can take for granted. Food insecurity, something where the land is literally created for regeneration, for crops that should be able to grow, heirloom seeds that have lasted a millennia, but yet we have 26% of Black American households being food insecure, again, and in soil that should be recreating bountifully for us. Nse already mentioned the fact that we can't even take air for granted as Black communities. We know some statistics from Robert Bullard from back in the day that said an African-American family making $50,000 a year is more likely to live in a county in violation of air pollution standards than a white American family making $15,000 a year. And we know that Black children are 4 times more likely to be hospitalized for asthma and 10 times more likely to die of asthma attack than white children. And so this is the price we pay for the differential access to something as basic as the common of air. When we talk about polluted water, that clean, safe, accessible, and affordable water, which is essential for life, is something that is not universally accessible, even though it's literally enshrined in international law, considered to be a human right by the United Nations. And so yet, of course, Black communities are more likely to have contaminated water. And so these are the challenges that we face. We also know that that quality healthcare, again, Nse talked about this earlier as well. So not only in terms of higher rates of infant mortality, higher rates of illness in early childhood and early childhood development challenges, but also more a child is more likely to lose her mother in childbirth. And we say this also exacerbated by being in places with poor air quality. And we see it also exacerbated by climate change, which is caused with the urban heat islands and the heat impact on maternal mortality as well documented. Our children are more likely to be in unhealthy schools. Black children comprise 81% of students at schools in communities with the top 10 most polluted air in the nation. So even going to school, like there's literally no safe haven for our children. Again, this is what goes back to our racism that upends the cradle. There's no cushioned places for our children. Even when in school trying to get an education, we find that bias in schools, particularly for Black boys, as young as age 10, Black boys are generally viewed as older than they actually are and less innocent than white boys. And so we see that issue in terms of, whether it's a school disciplinary action or otherwise. Yes, we do have that action. That's what, yes, the very report that we're putting out today has the statistics that we're sharing. The racism that upends the cradle. Maybe we can put it in the chat for folks who can see that. Yeah, okay, good, thanks. And so, and then under-resourced schools, whether it's because of property values that we see where property values are funding our school systems. And we know that property values are directly tied to things like toxic facilities being in our communities. A community with a toxic facility is more likely to, at least on average, 15% lower property values. And so when you have under-resourced schools because of lower property values and other dynamics, then it affects the quality of the education that the kids are getting in school. Talked about substandard healthcare. We talked about the imprisonment of our children because of, as we know, that whether it's the racial profiling, the police brutality, and that's the lucky folks who end up in prison, not to mention the folks who are innumerable. And when we talk about fathers like George Floyd, like all the other fathers that we've lost, Philando Castile and others, because the carceral state is either imprisoning folks or they get killed before they can even make it to prison. But it's all part of this the carceral state. And so when we talk about traumatic childhood events, it's everything from these losses to disasters that are disproportionately impacting our kids, to the fact that when I was doing a energy justice event, a person came in, she does trauma-informed care, and she talked about a young child who came through her door and because he had tried to commit suicide, and it was because their electricity was their oil and gas was turned off for non-payment. And so his mom plugged in a space heater in his room so that he can be warm, and the space heater caught fire and burned down the whole entire house. And then the young boy blamed himself because his mom put the space heater in his room for the loss of the house, and he tried to commit suicide as a result. 9 years old, for a 9-year-old to bear that burden of, and meanwhile these the owners of these utility companies are making an average $19 million a year in compensation, while someone misses a couple of bills and they pay the price of poverty by having their home burned down, or in worse situations, losing their lives. We wrote a report at the NAACP called Lights Out in the Cold, Reforming Utility Shutoff Policies as if Human Rights Matter. And too often in those situations where utilities are cut off, it's homes that have children in them. So unfortunately, the stories go on, but fortunately, we have with us Kristie and Adrienne, who are going to help to move us towards the hope that we have in resistance and resilience. We see many models of this transformation that we can make towards a solidarity economy, towards a living economy that really uplifts the well-being of all people and really embraces the abundance that is our regenerative earth. So I am going to hand it off to Adrienne and Kristie to end us on an uplifting note in terms of formal remarks, and then we'll have some discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I'll go first. I waited, Kristie. Everything that both Nse and Jacqui said resonated with me and made me think about a talk that I recently gave a couple of weeks ago to the American Family Therapy Academy at their annual conference. And the whole point of the conference was to look at environmental justice and climate change in our youth, right, in our Black youth. And the message that I was trying to get across, and the message that you need to understand here, is that children come to us, whatever that looks like, or whoever we are, with a multitude of challenges, right? In this instance, we need to think about environment as every place where they live, work, play, pray, go to school, everything. And, the environment includes things like you have to walk to school and people may be out selling drugs, I don't know, and they may want to, and you see that as a money-making thing, and your parents, your family is struggling, right? So that's a choice you have to make. Or, you may, for example, here's a great example. My brother and another relative and a bunch of friends had asthma growing up. I'm from Mobile, Alabama, around the corner from Africa Town, actually. And they had asthma. And in addition to the fact that people couldn't afford asthma medication, and they held babies over hot running water in the tub so that could open their airways, there was also the very real fear that the schools weren't prepared to deal with these students, right? To deal with the asthma attacks, particularly in the schools that were, yes, segregated is the word I'd like to use. Even though I was bused, it was still segregated. We were still in the minority, no pun intended. But and so that very fear is translated to the child, and we do carry on the concerns of our elders. When I was little, I saw my first Klan rally. We were at a park, a bunch of us, and I don't know what they were protesting, but we had grown up hearing stories, or not even stories, just hearing truths about what had happened in the Deep South. And I remember looking at my mom, and I must have been, I'm going to say third grade, and just seeing the fear, not like historic fear, you know what I mean? Like this is based on what people have had to carry for eons. That triggered in me. And so those are things that we carry forth. We carry forth things like hunger. I think Jacqui mentioned that. But some of us, including myself, depended on breakfast and lunch programs at school. And there was a very real fear of what was going to happen in the summer, of what was going to happen during COVID. And so my whole point in talking with them and in talking with you is to make the realization, I guess, to bring it home, that we need to think holistically. We need to think of everything, every issue. And we can't just say, whatever you're presenting to me, that's who you are, because it isn't. It's what made you. I mean, we are the product of our environment, right? And so, yes, it may take some time, but it's imperative that we know what that is, what those outlying challenges are, because we can't address the problem by addressing one particular component of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. And Kristie.
Oh, it's so hard to follow all of you. Agree with everything you've all been saying, speaking these truths. And really, it hits home working with the Children's Environmental Health Network over the 30 years that we've been around, obviously environmental justice has been something that, we've been championing and fighting for. But it really brings home the fact that if we're really going to make a difference, if we're really going to protect children's health, if we're really going to help Black children, we need to go deeper. We need to get to the roots, right? And as Adrienne said, we need to be thinking holistically and addressing systemic racism. Environmental justice is just one manifestation, right, of racism, and there's so many others, and they're all connected. So a partnership like this with the Chisholm Legacy Project is just, for me, it exemplifies what we need to be doing. We need to be connecting with folks that share the same vision, the same goals here of intentionally protecting our Black children, and therefore everybody's children, right? And so for us, we do focus, mostly on environmental justice issues and climate justice. And, I know I'm supposed to be talking about some of these positive things, right? So, for example, one of our big programs is eco-healthy childcare. And this program focuses obviously on early learning and care environments where the youngest and most vulnerable children spend, usually a significant portion of their time, right? Upwards of 40 hours or more a week. And these places, we don't know what's happening and what children are being exposed to. So the Eco-Healthy Childcare Program does provide, it's the only national program that we know of that provides training, technical assistance, free resources and information, and also an endorsement program for childcare professionals and childcare programs to really make sure that the settings that they provide to the kids in their care are free of toxics, or at least greatly reduced in toxics, to the best of their ability. And again, the challenge is making sure that the childcare programs that serve Black children are getting this information. So we don't work alone. We definitely reach out and work with our national child care partners, whether it's the Child Care Resource and Referral or the National Association of Education of Young Children, or the National Head Start and Early Head Start. We reach out, we try to make sure that this information gets into the right hands. And of course, ideally, we wouldn't always have to be educating ourselves, right? The burden of protecting our children shouldn't always be, from these environmental hazards, shouldn't just be on us. Ideally, we'd be seeing action from our governments, from all of these institutions and systems that are working towards protecting our kids. But while we work on that, we also have to, make sure that that we are providing the information that folks can take, the actions that they can take to protect their kids. And so that's one program that's been working hard for over a decade, and continues to work, with safe siting. There's a Choose Safe Places program that tries to make sure that childcare programs are not sited in hazardous locations or near hazardous locations, and trying to make sure that health departments, planners and zoners are having access to this, and recognizing the importance that where our youngest children spend their time needs to be safe. We also work with, again, another example of partnerships and the need for collaborative networks, the Cancer-Free Economy Network, which is, this vast network made up of environmental justice minded organizations, businesses, labor workforce folks, health folks, scientists and researchers, and just, all of these same minded folks coming together with the goal of, lifting the burden of cancer diagnoses and other environmentally mediated illnesses within this generation, by focusing on a non-toxic or a toxic-free economy, right? Like Jacqui was saying, we need to be moving away from extractive economies and towards more regenerative, sustainable, equitable economies. And so this goal, again, by sort of mapping out the system, right, and focusing on the different levers within the system that we think we can affect change in, and shifting this paradigm to make a difference. And I know one of the more recent, I think I can say this, but one of the more recent projects that the Cancer Free Network is working on is pulling together a report on cumulative exposures and resultant disparities with children's childhood cancer. So I think that's coming out, I want to say, in the fall. But again, through all of these different partnerships and networks, it's so important that we all come from a same understanding and the same goal of, anti-racist, anti-oppressive values, and work from that core shared value together. So just a couple of examples. I don't know, Nse, if you have more or anyone else wants to share other positive examples before we move into the questions.
Thank you, Kristie, so much. And Adrienne.
Yeah, I wanted to say, Kristie, you, once again, everything resonates. I presented that information, but what I really was excited about was that people wanted to know. And that's what we need, right? That's the positive there, right? Is that people realize that something is missing and that you can't address, just one issue. And if they hadn't asked the question, it would have been on some other issue that was totally not going to be as impactful as addressing this whole person approach. So I just wanted to say that.
Yes, thank you. And in that example of early learning, for example, as one example, the COVID pandemic just blew up this reality, this eureka moment that most of us have understood for about 15, 20 years, that you need to have quality, affordable, accessible childcare, even if parents are working from home, for parents to be effective and efficient and do the job that they have to do so that they can be better parents when they're with their kids. Because it is, I will say from firsthand, that first year was extremely stressful to have at that time a 4-year-old running through the house with no plan, and we had the ability to afford childcare, but there's many gradients of that. And majority of the childcare industry are women. Many are women of childbearing age. Mostly are women of color, by the way. So it's like the layers of impacts. Many of these childcare facilities are in homes. So it's this dual effect of what's happening in the home environment plus the small business. And if the small business closes, that has detrimental impacts for the home and the family. So we are still seeing the impacts of that, where many facilities had to close, not planning to close long-term, but still have not been able to open their doors. The ripple effect to the communities that they serve is tremendous. And what we are very worried about is that now means you have many makeshift childcare opening, someone taking in kids to help out, which is not exactly the safest circumstance. It may be a Band-Aid issue, but it's not what we would want to encourage, right? So just wanted to lay the fact that when we talk about generational impacts and where women in particular who are, nurturing the growth and development of young children, and in this case, Black children, where they're spending their time during the most formative developmental years, childcare, home, schools, as Adrienne mentioned, places of worship, grandma, grandpa's house, are extremely, extremely important. So we would like to just give a couple quick calls out to all of you. You came, you joined us. Number one, we'd encourage you to all be very intentional. Please read the report. We encourage you to sit with it, absorb it, go through the range of emotions that we have by writing and digesting and editing and going through again and switching things around, and really absorb those stories, really take it in for what it's worth and try to, absorb the lessons that we're trying to exemplify there. And my fellow panelists, would you like to jump in on other uses of the report that we would like to encourage?
I would say also making sure that we're thinking of the various systemic changes that are laid out in the recommendations as we put together platforms and other related, so that, as we talked about before, we can't think of like just myopically solving healthcare by dealing with the healthcare system, or myopically solving the energy crisis with just dealing with the energy system. We have to always be thinking about how intersectional they all are, and the fact that we have to really transition the entire economy for it to really work. There's no kind of scalpel approach to addressing the interconnected problems that lead us to where we are today. So really sitting with those recommendations and the reference points that we put in there to other comprehensive platforms that lay out the types of intersectional solutions that we need to advance and transformational shifts that we need to make in our society. That was what I was saying.
Yeah, thank you, Jacqui. Krista has a, I think, very powerful question in the Q&A. From a practical standpoint, I'm wondering if the panelists can speak to the threat of white replacement, which is at the core of voter suppression, redistricting, and other legislative gerrymandering, aimed to decrease the impact of the Black-Brown vote due to the looming threat of the browning of this nation. So the key question, how does one practically combat those who will fight tooth and nail, even when they vote against their own personal best interests, in order to maintain systems of power, privilege, and oppression? It's an excellent question. Wondering if anyone would like to take a first go at that.
I'll say super briefly that it really kind of derives from what we were talking about before in terms of scarcity, this false notion of scarcity. So therefore, there's not enough to go around. And so it's replaced, the whole replacement is because there's only so many places. And so people are displaced by other, when really, obviously not true. So one thing I would say too, with that is that's it, you know, as they say, all politics are local. And in order to really start to counter some of these things, I've seen where localism and really developing strong local economies where everyone is seen, heard, felt, held, and where communities come together and collectively decide what their vision is and what they need for their community, and where it's very intentional to set the table to say that everyone thrives in this circumstance and there's enough for us all to be able to thrive. And I think by doing that, then it, you know, the proof is in the pudding. You know, we can't just kind of say, oh, there's an abundance versus scarcity if someone's not feeling that. And the way people feel it is through community-driven collective approaches together. And it's a little bit simplistic, but it's at least kind of part of the whole. The other thing that we definitely need to do is to get money out of politics, because it is a well-crafted narrative that moves us to this place where people kind of buy this narrative that there is scarcity. And so thank you. And then they buy the politicians, they buy the messages, and so we have to make sure that we are getting money out of politics so that we truly have the people who are in control of the decision making around our policies, our systems, our regulations, and so forth. So those are a couple things.
No, that's important. And I see Nancy's hand up. I don't know if maybe you're calling in. I don't know if it's possible to unmute her line to get a question out.
Yeah, did that work?
Yes, we hear you.
Yes, thank you so much. And hi, Jacqui, it's Nancy. With my usual, complaints about power plants, and I so appreciate this discussion. And I confess I haven't read your reports, but Jacqui, I did read a lot of yours from the NAACP. And I'm an old white lady, and I know that when I first started in this work fighting clean coal and power plants, I was stunned. And I remember when I first started looking for reports, I found all these reports about how children who live near highways, the levels of pollution, which wasn't what I was going for. I was doing power plants. And so when you guys talk about how the problem is systemic and there's so much balkanization. I mean, it's unbelievable, of course, but this is what we have. And so I want to ask a question and ask you guys to put this in your thinking cap. So I've been working on regulatory reform now for years in the utilities regulatory space. And it really strikes me that state after state, very few of them actually even take into consideration environmental health effects from power plants, much less racism and environmental racism. And so it seems to me, as I continue to work on this and work with colleagues, that we need to find a model, and then we need to start pushing it in every state. And let me tell you about a funny catch-22 that I've been working on with my friends here in North Carolina, that because there's nothing in the law or the rules that says we have to look at pollution, we have to consider those costs, then the lawyers and the people who are the official, people in the proceeding, they don't bring it up. Because if you bring up something that's not in the rules or the law, you're breaking the rules. So I've been encouraging young people that I've been working with and others that, no, let's bring in non-lawyers, people representing themselves, to just start bringing up these issues, because it's way past time, of course. So, it's so awful that it's so balkanized and it's state by state, but that's what we have. So if you ladies have any ideas, thank you for listening.
Adrienne or Kristie, have any thoughts, or Jacqui? And thank you, Nancy. I mean, I think your question is similar to maybe what Dave Jacobs also put in the chat. How do we move, these, in your case, you talked about the plants, but there's many other point sources of pollution that have had legacy impactful impacts and are still happening today. So it's like, at what point does the status quo get turned around, right? So we know the heart of this, the core system here is the economic system, right? We're not making any mistake about that. And that then gets into just transition, that gets into people's livelihoods, that gets into employer versus employee. There's a lot of aspects there where in a lot of the most marginalized communities, fence line communities, I think we understand some of the biggest employers are also the biggest polluters, right? And so you have a vast majority of the town or the city working and very much dependent on the current viability, of that industry. So we are at all not naive here on this panel to think that this is just a water socket that we just turn off tomorrow. It takes grace, it takes intentionality, it takes, true partnership, it takes transparency, ownership, all of these things, which we are seeing in pockets of the community. Is it happening at the national stage? No, by no means. And I think we would all understand, especially from a few administrations ago, majority of work has been happening at the state level anyway. That's been proactive in any way, barring the last administration that tried to roll back over 100 and some environmental health, public health policies. So it doesn't, groups like us at the national level are not turning our back, to federal policy that's just as important to us. And I feel like you can and need to do both, in my humble opinion. And there are some good examples, I think, of cities, towns getting it better than they've been. Is anyone perfect? Of course not. But that whole notion of where we started, connecting on a human level, hearing each other out, understanding we all want viable communities. We all want safe, healthy communities. In our case, no one's really against our mission here. I do believe that overall, people want healthy children. But the history in this country has shown that when we get to certain pockets of children, that becomes questionable because of the so many levels of roadblocks that are placed in, again, the education system, just being healthy at home, safe at home, whatever home looks like, right? Enfranchised situations at school, in the neighborhoods, whatnot. So this is big, right? It didn't happen overnight. It's not going to be solved overnight. And yet I believe we are here with a sense of hope that by the tail end of the report, we do get into a good amount of just examples we're calling out. It is not exhaustive. So, our apologies up front for any partners on the phone who feel like they, should be there. And we want to be able to highlight good work happening. This work will continue. Our talking of this report, our amplifying of this report will continue. We strongly encourage and hope and call on all of you to think about your networks, to think about the political connections you have, the practice, policy, standard setting connections you have, and that includes individual, voters. That includes, your neighbors. That includes people who, when we know all come together, do have a history in this country of creating a tipping point. Does it happen on the margin that I would love it to happen, like yesterday, many decades ago? No, but there is evidence that it certainly, can happen. So whether it's each of these plants being closed that are not adhering to current guidelines, or the many other examples of situations where advocates come together with community to rise up together and say, no, this is not okay. This is not what we're going to stand for. And we're not going to get in the way of all children and the most marginalized children, at least having a basic fair start in life. But Adrienne, I see your hand up.
Yes, I wanted to say that what we're talking about, a lot of activity does occur at the state level. People have become not so dependent on federal law, in the last few years. And so you see a lot of states, not all, as you say, a lot of states are taking that initiative. And part of that is talking about cumulative exposure pathways and exposure routes, and those things. And what we really need to take out of our lexicon, right, is sacrifice communities, because there should be none. And I think that once we start realizing that everybody's equal and that what affects one will affect all, just that some are affected first, right, and worse, is that we need to start thinking about the fact that there are no donuts of death. There are no sacrifice zones. No one is better or worse than anyone else. And I think that some states get that, or at least environmental justice groups in those states get that. And the states, the local governments in some instances, I'm thinking about some of my community partners, are working together to address this. Now, of course, there are some words that we can't use, critical race theory and all of that, but the history plays a big role in where we are today. I think we've all said that in different ways. So I think that when we talk about any issue, we've got to approach it from, why are we here? Why are we where we are today? And it's because of where we were put before. And what do we need to do to rectify that? And yes, it may start at the state level, and then it should be a model for other states, and then eventually, federal law. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrienne. As we're kind of rounding out here, just want to also acknowledge that a few other invitations. We would love to hear from you. We would love to hear how you're potentially utilizing, leaning in on this report, who you're sharing it with, what are some of the responses you're getting. If there's somewhere we could show up, if there are bodies coming together that would like to use this report as a basis of conversation discussion, those are, things we can consider. We want this to be impactful. We did not spend almost 2 years of our lives kind of just putting things together. This has been extremely, again, emotionally draining in many ways. And yet at the same time, I think Jacqui's words in the chat are so, as usual, so important. We need to be the change we want to see in the world by beginning to build the local economies and then showcase these self-determined, thriving communities so that others can replicate. So that notion of that question back to fear, the fear mongering. And let's face it, majority of the history of this country has had glimmers here and there of what we now consider marginalized communities having their balanced opportunity for an economic free type of living, much more than today and much more than ever in my lifetime. And so to be, I guess if I was devil's advocate, if you've never seen that, I guess the threat of, other communities having something similar to what you have, or at least have access to, could be threatening. But when it's perpetuated, and again, on false narratives and on, and definitely not what we as humans, I believe are here to do. We're supposed to be working together, living together, thriving together, not oppressing certain people. So that is what we are here to do. That is what, we want to connect with as many of you as possible. So please do reach out to us, let us know, give us feedback, on the report. We'd love to hear that as well. But to my fellow panelists, any closing points here before we let you all enjoy the rest of your day?
Someone just asked in the Q&A how they can follow up and be in touch. So I will write on our end one email address. Maybe you all can add one in there. So this is our executive assistance team with the Chisholm Legacy Project. So I want to make sure everyone has that from a practical standpoint. Otherwise, go on, Kristie.
I was just going to say thank you to everybody. And again, it was such an honor for me to participate in this. I feel hopeful despite everything that's been going on recently with this report and with all of the appreciation and excitement I'm seeing in the chat and knowing that I'm in good company in the work that we all do.
Yes. Yes, and on behalf of the Chisholm Legacy Project, we also thank you all so deeply, and we're going to continue to tell this story. We're going to continue to always point us back to the need for just transition and illustrate it in all the ways it's needed. We know that the headlines of today that aren't even represented in the report, but so much has happened even in the past couple of weeks that just point to the need again for shifting away from an extractive economy. And so definitely looking forward to linking arms with you all, linking hearts with you all to move forward. So our contact information is in the chat. Did you add yours to Insight? I didn't see it.
Thank you. We put it in the Q&A, but I'm putting it here too,
All right, good.
just so everyone can have it.
Yes, great. So again, we thank you all, and we'll keep communicating and keep mobilizing. Thank you.
Thank you. Be well.
Yes.